The first thing I noticed about the old school was the silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the sort of silence that presses down on you, as if the air itself is holding its breath. The building loomed against the twilight sky, its windows gaping black and broken like missing teeth. Paint peeled from the bricks in curling strips, and weeds grew tall where children had once lined up for recess. I told myself I was only here out of curiosity. Urban exploration, nothing more. Still, I couldn't shake the unease prickling at the back of my neck as I walked up the cracked steps. The front door should have been locked. Places like this usually are. Rusted chains, heavy padlocks, maybe even boarded-up entrances. But when I reached for the handle, I froze. The door was already open, yawning inward like it had been expecting me. I hesitated, listening. The wind whistled faintly through the jagged windows, carrying the smell of mildew and something sharper, almost metallic. I thought of turning back. Instead, I flicked on my flashlight and stepped inside. The beam cut through layers of dust. The hallway stretched long and dark, lined with faded murals of smiling children holding hands beneath a painted sun. Their faces were cracked, chipped by time, the bright colors dulled to sickly pastels. I couldn't help imagining those painted eyes following me as I moved deeper inside. Every footstep echoed unnaturally, bouncing off the high ceilings. It was too loud, as though the sound traveled farther than it should, spilling into unseen spaces. I passed a row of lockers, most dented, some still bearing scraps of stickers and names carved into the metal. One locker door hung slightly open. I tried not to look, but the flashlight beam slid across it anyway. Inside was a single shoe, a child's sneaker, the sole worn thin. "Just left behind," I whispered aloud, though my voice sounded small and wrong here. Nothing weird about that. But the air disagreed. It felt heavier the farther I went, clinging to my skin like damp fabric. At the end of the hall, a classroom door stood ajar. My hand shook as I pushed it open. The room was a graveyard of overturned desks and shattered glass. A chalkboard spanned the wall, the writing still faintly visible, long division problems scrawled in dusty white. My flashlight flicked over something beneath the board. A message carved directly into the plaster. "Don't go downstairs." I swallowed hard, suddenly aware of how dry my throat had become. The letters were jagged, desperate, not the idle scratching of a bored student, but something else, something urgent. The floor groaned behind me. I spun, the flashlight beam trembling wildly. Nothing moved, nothing was there, yet the desks seemed slightly shifted, as if something had brushed against them in the dark. My pulse thundered. That's when I noticed the faint outline of a stairwell door at the far side of the classroom. Heavy wood, scarred by deep gouges, as if someone had clawed their way out. The carved warning echoed in my head. I should have left then. I should have run. But I didn't. Instead, I stepped closer, drawn to the door as if the building itself was pulling me in. And when I pressed my ear to the wood, I swore I heard something on the other side. Breathing. The sound was faint but unmistakable, slow, deliberate breaths muffled by the heavy wood. I froze with my ear pressed against the stairwell door, every nerve screaming at me to step back. Yet my body wouldn't obey. It was as if I were rooted there, listening to something that should not exist in a place abandoned for decades. I forced myself to move, staggering back a few steps. My flashlight trembled in my grip, its cone of light sliding across cracked tiles and broken desks. The air was colder near the stairwell, heavy with the scent of rust and damp earth. "Probably just the wind," I muttered, but the words fell flat. The lie didn't convince even me. The door handle was tarnished brass, green with corrosion. I shouldn't have touched it, but my fingers closed around the metal anyway, compelled by a reckless urge to know. For a long moment, I only held it, expecting it to resist, to remain stubbornly locked. It turned easily. The hinges wailed as the door drifted open, revealing a stairwell that descended into a gulf of black. The smell hit me first. Mildew, mold, and something ranker beneath it, sharp and sour, like rotting meat. I gagged, raising the sleeve of my jacket to my face. My flashlight beam cut into the dark, but the steps seemed to swallow the light. They looked uneven, warped with age, the edges crumbling into dust. A damp trail stained the middle of the stairs, as if something had been dragged downward long ago. I should have shut the door. That would have been the sensible choice. But instead, I set my foot on the first step. The wood groaned under my weight, and I flinched. Still, I kept moving, step by step, each creak sounding like a scream in the silence. Halfway down, I stopped. The breathing had returned, closer now, steady, rasping, inhumanly slow. My flashlight flicked across the walls, and I saw deep scratches etched into the plaster. Not random, but deliberate. Words. Help us. The letters were gouged violently, some smeared with something dark that had long since dried. I backed against the wall, my chest tightening, heart racing so fast it hurt. Then something shifted below me, a faint shuffle, followed by the scrape of nails or claws against concrete. I ran. My boots pounded the steps, the flashlight beam jerking wildly. I burst back into the classroom, slamming the stairwell door shut behind me. My lungs burned, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped the flashlight. For a moment, the silence returned. I leaned against a desk, fighting to steady my breathing. And then, softly, the sound came again. Not from behind the stairwell door this time, but from the hall. Footsteps. I raised the flashlight and aimed it at the open classroom door. The beam caught the corner of a shadow moving just beyond the threshold, too tall, too thin, its limbs bending wrong. The figure lingered for a heartbeat, then melted back into the dark. I stood frozen, unable to breathe, unable to blink, until the echo of the footsteps faded into silence. The message carved into the wall burned in my mind. Don't go downstairs. I had disobeyed, and now, whatever lived here, knew I was inside. I pressed myself against the nearest desk, the flashlight clutched so tightly in my hand that my knuckles ached. The shadow I'd seen in the hall lingered in my mind like an afterimage burned onto my vision. Too tall, too thin. Wrong in a way that made my stomach twist. For a long moment, the silence held. I strained to hear anything. Breathing, movement, even the distant creak of old wood. But the building was quiet again. Almost too quiet, like it was pretending, waiting for me to move first. I swallowed hard and tried to calm myself. Maybe it was a trick of the light. Maybe I imagined it. The lies felt weak, brittle, ready to snap the second I touched them. My eyes darted toward the open classroom door. The hallway beyond looked impossibly long. The darkness pooled in corners too deep for my flashlight to pierce. The air had grown colder, biting through my jacket. I could almost feel the shadow still there, crouched just out of sight. I forced myself to step forward. One step, then another. My boots crunched over shattered glass, the sound painfully loud in the suffocating silence. The hallway stretched before me, lined with more classrooms, each door hanging crooked, paint flaking like diseased skin. My flashlight beam caught a bulletin board, paper notices still pinned to it. They were yellowed, curling at the edges. Spring Talent Show, March 1987. Beneath it, another flyer, missing student. If you have any information. The picture was faded, the child's face blurred by time, but the sight of it filled me with an unease deeper than fear. Somewhere ahead, the floor creaked. I froze, light darting forward. For a second, I saw nothing. Then, movement, quick, darting, gone before I could register what it was. Hello? My voice cracked. The sound echoed too far, bouncing down the hall in a way that made my skin crawl. Is someone there? No answer. Only silence. But when I lowered the flashlight, I noticed something on the tiles. Footprints. Small ones, the size of a child's, stamped in dust that hadn't been disturbed in decades. They led from one of the classrooms into the hallway, and then stopped. Just stopped. As if the child had vanished into thin air. My chest tightened. The air seemed heavier now, thick and damp like the bottom of a well. I turned slowly, sweeping the beam behind me. The shadow was there. At the far end of the hall, standing utterly still, its limbs dangled too long, joints bending the wrong way, the head tilted at an impossible angle. The flashlight quivered in my hand, the beam shivering across its outline. It didn't move, didn't breathe, just watched. I stumbled back into the nearest classroom, slamming the door shut and pressing my weight against it. My heart thundered, sweat prickled my skin despite the cold. The silence stretched, then came the sound, fingernails or claws scraping lightly across the door, slow, taunting, back and forth. I clamped a hand over my mouth, holding my breath, and then, as suddenly as it began, the scraping stopped. I waited, trembling, until the silence felt unbearable. Finally, I dared to lift the flashlight and shine it toward the cracked window. Written in the grime, in fresh streaks, were 2 words. Found you. The words scrawled across the window burned into my mind. Found you. They hadn't been there seconds before. I backed away, the flashlight trembling, my reflection warped in the filthy glass. My pulse pounded so loud it seemed to drown out everything else. I couldn't stay here. I had to get out. Gripping the flashlight like a weapon, I shoved the classroom door open and bolted into the hallway. The air outside felt colder, heavier, as if the building itself exhaled when I left the room. My boots slapped against the cracked tiles, each step a gunshot in the silence. The front doors. That was the only thought in my mind. Get out, leave, forget this place ever existed. I sprinted down the hall, past lockers with peeling paint, past murals with smiling children whose eyes seemed to follow me in the beam of my light. My breath came in ragged bursts, clouds in the freezing air. Finally, I reached the main entrance. The tall double doors loomed ahead, their glass shattered long ago. I lunged for the handle, wrenched it open, and stopped. On the other side wasn't the night sky or the cracked steps where I'd entered. It was another hallway, identical, long, stretching into darkness. I blinked, staggered back. My mind reeled, refusing to process what I was seeing. I turned, ran to the side exit near the gym. My hands shook as I shoved the bar. The door banged open, another hallway. Same peeling paint, same rows of lockers. "No," I whispered. My voice shook. "No, no, no." I ran again, this time toward the windows. I didn't care about cuts or broken glass, I just needed out. I swung my flashlight at the nearest pane, ready to smash through. But the beam revealed not glass, but brick, solid, unbroken brick, laid neatly where a window had been moments before. I staggered back. Another window. Brick. Another. Brick. Every single one sealed. The building was changing around. Me. Trapping me. A low hum vibrated through the floor, faint but steady, like distant machinery waking after decades of silence. The walls seemed closer, the ceiling lower. I felt squeezed, swallowed. I stumbled toward the stairwell again, desperate for any escape. My light flickered as I reached the door, the one carved with desperate warnings. My hand hovered over the handle. Something scraped behind me. I spun. The hallway stretched empty, but the light wavered, catching glimpses of movement at the edges, shadows retreating just as I turned. I could feel it, not just one presence, but many, watching, waiting. I backed toward the stairwell door, panic clawing at my chest. My breath shook, shallow and fast. The carved words burned in my mind, "Don't go downstairs." But upstairs was gone. Outside was gone. The door groaned as I pushed it open. Stale, damp air spilled out, colder than the rest of the building. The stench hit harder this time, sharp and sour, like rot soaked into stone. The sound returned too. Breathing. Deep, steady, impossibly slow. I hesitated, flashlight quivering. My choices were gone. Stay here with the shadows, or go down into the dark. A faint whisper rose from the stairwell, barely audible but unmistakable. My name. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself onto the first step. The door slammed shut behind me. The stairwell swallowed me whole. The moment the door slammed shut behind me, the sound echoed like a gunshot, reverberating through the walls until it faded into silence. My flashlight quivered in my hand, its beam stretching down into the black. The steps seemed endless, carved from crumbling concrete slick with moisture. The air grew heavier as I descended. Dampness clung to my skin, and the stench was unbearable now, rot mixed with rust, like old blood soaked into stone. My chest tightened with each breath. I tried to keep my footsteps quiet, but the creaks and crunches echoed too far, carrying into places unseen. Scratches lined the walls here too, gouged deep into the plaster. They weren't words this time, but frantic claw marks, some fresh, flakes of plaster scattered beneath them. My stomach twisted. Whatever made them was still down here. The stairwell opened into a wide corridor. The floor was uneven, puddles reflecting my shaking beam. Pipes ran along the ceiling, dripping steadily, the sound like a clock ticking in the dark. My light caught faded signs on the walls. Boiler room, storage, records. Records. Something in me latched onto the word. Maybe there would be answers. Maybe even a way to understand what this place had become. I followed the signs, every step loud in the stillness. The records room door was heavy steel, dented and scarred. It resisted when I pulled, but eventually groaned open. A wave of stale air spilled out, thicker than before. Inside, rows of filing cabinets loomed, most rusted, some toppled. Papers littered the floor, yellow and brittle. I crouched, sweeping my light across the nearest file. Names, dates, attendance sheets from decades ago. But many were strange. Lists of children marked transferred, then crossed out, rewritten with the word retained. Page after page, always retained. A chill crawled up my spine. One drawer, hung open, papers spilling out. Among them was a stack of photographs. My hand shook as I picked one up. Children, standing in front of the very school I was in, smiling stiffly, their eyes dull, lifeless. Some of their faces were blurred, as if the photo had rotted only where they stood. Others looked too familiar, though I couldn't place why. I dropped the photo, heart racing, and turned. A shadow filled the doorway. Tall, thin, its limbs crooked. The flashlight beam flickered as if recoiling from it. My breath froze in my throat. The figure didn't move, didn't breathe, just blocked the exit. I stumbled backward, crashing into a cabinet. Metal shrieked, papers flew. The noise was deafening. The shadow tilted its head, slow and deliberate, like a predator watching prey. The flashlight sputtered, dimming. Panic surged through me. In desperation, I hurled it at the figure. The beam spun wildly, clattering across the floor. For an instant, the light caught its face. Not a face at all. Hollow, smooth except for a wide, gaping mouth stretching far too high, filled with jagged teeth. I ran. Blind in the dark, I crashed into cabinets, stumbled through papers. My hands clawed at the walls until I found another door, wrenching it open. Cold air rushed out, carrying the smell of earth. I slammed it shut behind me, chest heaving, plunging into a narrow passage that sloped even deeper underground. And as I staggered forward, I realized something chilling. The breathing wasn't behind me anymore. It was in front. The passage narrowed the farther I went, the walls damp and pressing close, flaking plaster giving way to raw stone. My breath rasped loud in my ears, too loud, masking the faint, steady inhalations ahead of me. Each step was reluctant, forced, but the thought of turning back was worse. I knew what waited in the dark behind me. The floor sloped down until it leveled into a chamber. My flashlight, retrieved from the floor in my mad dash, flickered weakly but still cut a cone through the gloom. The beam revealed rows of wooden chairs, child-sized, arranged in neat lines. Each chair faced a blackboard bolted to the far wall. I froze, bile rising in my throat. The chairs weren't empty. Figures sat slumped in them, small and unmoving. Dozens of children, skin shriveled and gray, eyes sunk deep into skulls. Some still clutched notebooks, the pages fused to their fingers with mildew. Their mouths hung open in silent screams. I staggered backward, hand clamped over my mouth. The stench was unbearable, thick with decay. But worse than the sight was the sound, the breathing. It didn't come from the bodies. It came from deeper still. I forced myself to turn away, my light sweeping the walls. On the blackboard, scrawled in chalk that hadn't faded, were words written over and over. Stay in class. Stay in class. Stay in class. My pulse pounded so hard it made my vision blur. I stumbled toward the far side of the chamber, desperate to get away from the lifeless rows. A door waited there, iron and scarred, slightly ajar. I pushed through. The next space was larger, the ceiling lost in shadow. Pipes crisscrossed above, dripping water that echoed like a clock. At the center of the room stood something massive. At first, I thought it was a furnace, but as I stepped closer, I saw the truth. It was a machine, cobbled together from rusted metal, gears, and thick cables that burrowed into the stone floor. Symbols were carved into its surface, circles, jagged lines, patterns that hurt to look at. The machine pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat, and around it, more children. Not corpses this time, shadows of them, translucent, their faces blank but familiar. They flickered like film reels, stuttering, staring at me with hollow eyes. One of them stepped forward, its mouth opened, and a voice hissed out, too low, too deep to belong to a child. "You shouldn't be here." The flashlight dimmed, and the temperature dropped so sharply I could see my breath plume in the air. My chest tightened as the children's shadows closed in, circling, their whispers layering into a deafening chorus. "Stay in class, stay in class, stay in class." I pressed my back against the wall, searching for an exit. The machine throbbed louder, its gears grinding, as if waking fully. The air vibrated with its power, rattling my teeth. And then, among the whispers, I heard it again. My name, drawn from the machine's hollow core, stretched and twisted, but undeniably mine. The shadows froze. All eyes turned toward the pulsing metal. I realized with sickening certainty that the machine wasn't just alive. It knew me. The machine's pulse rattled through the chamber, a sickly rhythm that seemed to sync with my heartbeat. Each throb echoed in my chest, pulling me closer, as if invisible strings had hooked into my veins. I tried to fight it, but my legs moved on their own, dragging me toward the rusted bulk. The children's shadows parted silently, making space. Their faces were blank, but I felt their gazes burrow into me, urging me forward. The whispers pressed against my skull like nails. "Stay in class, stay in class, stay in class." "No," I gasped, though the words sounded weak in the cavernous space. My flashlight flickered, barely holding a glow. I swept it across the chamber, searching for a way out. Only walls, no doors, no cracks. The machine was the center, the heart, and it wanted me. A vent of steam hissed from its side, carrying a reek of scorched metal and blood. I gagged, stumbling closer. The cables that snaked into the floor pulsed faintly, glowing red like veins filled with molten fire. They spread across the stone, reaching under the children's seats, under the walls, feeding the school itself. This wasn't just beneath the building, it was part of it. The machine throbbed again, and my name spilled out in that guttural, drawn-out rasp. "Aaron." My knees buckled. I fell to the damp floor, palms scraping against grit. The children's shadows closed in tighter, their whispers rising into shrill chants. "Stay, stay, stay." The blackboard words flashed in my mind. The photographs in the records room, the missing children, retained, not lost, not gone, absorbed. I lifted my head, shaking. You feed on them." The machine answered with a grinding roar, gears screeching as if in triumph. The floor shuddered. Dust rained from the ceiling. The children's forms flickered violently, their hollow faces warping, mouths stretching too wide, eyes dark pits of nothing. Shadow stepped out from the crowd, taller, thin, limbs bent at impossible angles. The figure I had seen in the hallway, its faceless head tilted toward me, the mouth splitting wide to reveal jagged teeth. It didn't speak. It didn't need to. It was the teacher. I scrambled back, my flashlight slipping from my grip and clattering across the floor. The beam swung wildly, landing on the machine's surface. For the first time, I saw an opening at its core, a hatch, slightly ajar, glowing faintly from within. The pull intensified. My body trembled, dragged toward that opening. The teacher's shadow moved in sync with me, guiding me, herding me like livestock. "No!" I shouted, clawing at the floor. My nails cracked against stone. I tore my gaze away, forcing myself to think. Not the machine, not the trap. The whispers rose, deafening. My skull felt like it would split. In desperation, I seized the flashlight, its beam sputtering weakly. I aimed it at the machine's hatch and drove the metal end against the gears beside it. Sparks flew. A high-pitched screech filled the chamber, the children's shadows convulsing. The machine shrieked like a living thing, the glow inside flaring blinding white. For an instant, the pull released me, and that's when I ran toward the only gap I could see. A crack in the far wall, no wider than a doorway, revealed as the shadows recoiled. Behind me, the machine bellowed my name again. This time it sounded angry. The crack in the wall gaped like a wound, and I hurled myself through it before the machine's light could swallow me whole. The stone scraped my arms and shoulders as I squeezed into the narrow passage, stumbling into a smaller chamber beyond. My chest heaved, lungs burning, ears still ringing with the machine's roar. The whispers didn't stop. They followed me. Stay in class. Stay in class. I pressed forward, flashlight beam jerking across the cramped space. It smelled of dust and damp earth, but underneath lingered something sharper. Ozone, like lightning had struck underground. My hands trembled, the light catching on more carvings in the walls. Not warnings this time, but lessons. Simple arithmetic, spelling words, childish drawings of suns and stick figures, all etched into stone with desperate fingers. A shiver ran through me. The children hadn't just died here. They'd been kept here, taught here, retained forever. The passage sloped upward now, faint currents of air brushing against my face. Hope flared weakly. An exit. If I could just reach it. The floor shook. Dust rained down. Behind me, the machine bellowed, its roar reverberating through the stone. The voices grew shrill, 1,000 overlapping screams. I ran, my boots pounding the uneven ground. The air grew colder, each breath slicing my throat. Ahead, faint moonlight seeped through a gap in the ceiling. A broken grate. Salvation. I scrambled toward it, claws of panic digging into my chest. My hands reached, stretching for the opening. Something seized my ankle. I screamed, twisting around. A child's hand, gray and skeletal, gripped me with impossible strength. Dozens more emerged from the shadows, crawling, dragging themselves toward me. Their mouths gaped in soundless cries, eyes hollow sockets. "Let go!" I kicked wildly, boots connecting with brittle bones that cracked but didn't release. More tourists. Hands clamped onto me, climbing my legs, my arms, trying to pull me back into the dark. The whispers filled my skull, deafening. Stay in class, stay in class. No! My throat tore with the scream. I grabbed the jagged edge of the grate, hauling myself upward with everything left in me. Flesh tore. Blood slicked my palms, but I pulled. Light spilled over me as I forced my body through the gap. The children shrieked, recoiling, their hands retreating into shadow. The last fingers slipped from my ankle as I rolled onto cold grass, the night sky above me vast and starless. I lay there gasping, every muscle trembling. The school loomed behind me, its windows black, its walls silent. For a moment, it looked like nothing more than a ruin. Empty. Dead. But then, faintly, I heard it. Breathing. Slow, steady, from deep within the walls. The machine wasn't gone. It was only waiting. I staggered to my feet, blood dripping from my hands. My legs wobbled, but I forced myself away, across the field, never looking back. At the edge of the woods, I paused. My flashlight was dead now, but I didn't need it. The glow from the school pulsed faintly, a heartbeat in the dark. I knew what it meant. The children weren't gone. They never would be. The school had claimed them, and it had tried to claim me. As I limped into the trees, one final thought clawed its way through the haze of terror. The door had been open when I arrived. It hadn't been waiting for me. It was waiting for the next one.